we really try to advocate for improved quality of care for people with IBD. A number of years ago, we did an audit of 71 hospitals around Australia, and we used these standards that were developed for IBD care, and we found that less than 1% of hospitals actually met all those standards. So in the whole of Australia, only 1%, it's just under 1%. Not many hospitals.
Well, hello. Welcome to another episode of Everybody Knows. I'm Ben, of course. I'm so glad you're joining me. As you guys know, this is a brand new podcast. This is only the 4th episode, and I'm learning so much in doing this, but I'm really enjoying engaging with you guys, getting your feedback, whether it be on YouTube or on social media. So keep it coming. I'm really loving putting out this content and seeing where it goes. If you haven't listened to the first 3 episodes, episode 1, I really set up what I'm doing here at the podcast. I sit with my best mate of 25 plus years, and we talk about my health story and challenges. That was hard, but it was like therapeutic for me to tell my story and talk about the important moments that led me to, starting this podcast. So if you haven't listened to that one, obviously go back. I recommend that. Episode 2 was awesome. It was Kerry Cox, who is a mind-body nutritionist. And she really talks about the how do we eat to support our digestion and metabolism. So that was really important. I've integrated some of those practices and found a real benefit. I'm eating less, but getting a bit more energy out of my food, which is awesome. And the most recent episode, episode 3, is with researcher and lecturer Dr. Daniel Hackett, who is currently researching the impacts of exercise, or more accurately, progressive resistance training on inflammatory bowel disease, which is obviously, for me, being diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 12, is hugely of huge interest to me. So if you want to know more about that, episode 3. But now, let me bring you episode 4. My guest today is CEO of Crohn's and Colitis Australia, Leanne Raven. And Leanne is a beautiful human being. We got on so well, but what I really loved is I learned so much more about the organisation of Crohn's and Colitis Australia and what they're doing to not only support sufferers of IBD, but also those close to them, and how they are supporting research and education of the medical industry as well on these diseases. So this is going to be great for you, obviously, if you suffer from inflammatory bowel disease. But if you do know of somebody who has a close loved one, friend, colleague, and you want to just know a bit more about it so you can support them and talk to them about it better. Now, if you're interested in finding out more about Crohn's and Colitis Australia, you can go to their website, which is crohnsandcolitis.com.au. I'll put the link in the show notes. Thanks so much again. Let's get into this discussion. Leanne, thanks so much for your time today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Oh, great to meet you, Ben, and really keen to have a chat with you as well.
Yeah. Now, I feel bad. I'm up here in Queensland. In Queensland right now, it's like a pandemic is not happening. We see it on the news, but we've been fortunate. You're down in Victoria and not so fortunate at this point in time.
We are in lockdown at the moment. So, again, this is the second time, and it's going to be going on for a few weeks. So, really, for us, life hasn't been that different since March when the pandemic started.
Right.
So we've all been working from home and walking around with masks on, and we're not allowed to go out unless we really need to shop and, to exercise. It's really changed, changed how we're living.
Yeah, and cases are still ramping up, or they're certainly not easing. The curve hasn't flattened yet, whereas in Queensland they have, and we've shut all our borders.
Yes.
And lots of people are almost going back to life as normal here. But you guys at the association, you guys are still working remotely, of course, and it's had a big impact on your operations for this year, hasn't it?
It certainly has. 2020 is very different from what we thought it would be. But we're all coping pretty well. We're only a small team at Crohn's and Colitis Australia. There's only 11 of us, and one is in Queensland actually. And she runs our helpline, Anita, who's up in Queensland. But we're all working from home, as I said, and things have, going along quite well. We've had lots of challenges though, in not being able to provide all the support services that we normally do. And the key ones that we've relied on have been our nurse line and our helpline. And of course they've, in different months when people have been really anxious, we've seen a really high increase in calls and emails. And so we've really ramped up our communications to all our members. At Crohn's and Colitis Australia, we've got about 2,500 members all around the country. And we know, there's in 2022, there will be 100,000 people living with inflammatory bowel disease in Australia. So
Wow.
There's quite a lot of people out there who live with, chronic illnesses of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis.
That's and where does it sit right now? So that it's about 80,000.
Yeah, we estimate about 85, but we're heading up, each year.
Okay.
It's increasing.
Yeah. And so, Leanne, could you just really basically explain what Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis is, or as we know, it's an umbrella. There's an umbrella term called inflammatory bowel disease. For those listeners that might be interested to know more, or maybe have heard of a loved one that has it, and just don't quite understand what it is, let's kind of preface it with what are these illnesses, and then we'll go. I'd love to. Obviously, we're going to go into what the association does, how it supports sufferers, and what are the challenges of sufferers, and maybe how they can get involved and things like that. But not just the sufferers, the people that are affected quite significantly, whether it be family, friends, or just employers, or people just trying to understand what it is, because you don't get a bandage on your head when you've got Crohn's disease, but it's a debilitating disease, or ulcerative colitis, a debilitating disease, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really important that I think the public understand. So.
Yeah, and I think that your description of not having a Band-Aid, that something that's visible, is a real issue with for people living with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Because it's not a visible disease. It's not like a chronic illness that you can see, such as an infectious disease or something like that. But I like to explain it to people because a lot of people get confused between irritable bowel syndrome, so IBS, when people have sort of symptoms where they, feel bloated or tummy, abdominal pain and those sorts of things, they think, oh, well, that's IBD. But IBD's inflammatory bowel disease is they're really serious illnesses, They're autoimmune diseases of the gut, and, depending on where that inflammation is in the gut is how the sort of disease is diagnosed. So if people have it in the colon, then that's colitis and ulcerative colitis. But if people have it all through the gastrointestinal tract from the mouth to the anus, then, that can be Crohn's disease. And, I sort of describe it to people. Imagine, inflammation that you see on your skin. When you hurt yourself and it goes all red and gets all sore. Well, imagine, all your insides being inflamed. You can't see it, but that's what it looks like, and it can get really nasty looking in there. And so people living with these conditions look well and healthy on the outside, but inside it's a very difficult situation. So I think that's sort of, understanding and appreciation of what that might be like. If you start to imagine and think about that, can explain some of the symptoms that people have to live with every day when their disease is not managed well. And these diseases often occur in young people, usually around the age of 15 to 30, but can be younger. The youngest that we've sort of heard about is, age 3.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and, and then they don't ever go away, these chronic illnesses. There's treatments that can be applied, but they're things, it stays there. We don't know why they occur, and we don't know a cause for this illness, and we don't have a cure for it.
Yeah.
They're really serious gut diseases that can be very debilitating.
Yeah, and of course, I know from personal experience, I was diagnosed with Crohn's at age 12. Mm-hmm. Back then, I feel like an oldie when I say back then, but back then, that was 1994, so last century. But I'd never heard of Crohn's disease. My family had never heard of it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it took quite a while for them to diagnose it as well. Even I had emergency bowel surgery, a resection. It took out an abscess, a huge abscess on my bowel, and it wasn't until 2, maybe even 3 weeks after the surgery that they diagnosed me with Crohn's disease. And that was like what do you, another language. I didn't, we had to learn all about it. But how does it, I know from personal experience how it affects me. I mean, it can be when you're in a flare, it's not just a pain in the gut, as you said, and people can be, it affects your joints, right? It affects your thoughts. We know there's a lot going on in research about the brain-gut connection and the importance of gut, the healthy gut microbiome. And when all of this is out of balance, your body just doesn't work, and your immune system particularly doesn't work properly. So, I belong to one of the support groups, and there's all manner of, secondary symptoms for Crohn's.
Absolutely. It's a really individual disease, isn't it? Everyone's experience is not replicated in its full form. It's different. Mm-hmm. And we really rely on our immune system to function well. And when it's not working well, you can develop these autoimmune diseases, and there's a whole range of them, from multiple sclerosis, psoriasis, to inflammatory bowel disease. They're all sort of in the same group of diseases impacting on different parts of the body. They can be really nasty. And I think you mentioned, Ben, that it took a while for them to work out what was going wrong, and that is really very common. It can take a good while until people, get a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And, I've met people who, quite often young people who, they lose a lot of weight because they're so sick, and their food can't be absorbed properly because of all the linings of the gut being damaged. And often, they end up on that pathway where people think they've got eating disorders, and can take a really good while to, and they could be a little bit depressed because of that, mind-gut connection. And, just trying to cope with this physiological thing that's or pathophysiological thing that's going on in their body.
Yeah.
So, it can take a good while, and often they go on the wrong path if they don't end up with someone who's really familiar with inflammatory bowel disease. And some of the work that we're doing at Crohn's and Colitis Australia at the moment is around developing programs for health professionals. And we've got one coming up pretty soon for dietitians.
Okay.
Because, diets are a really important part of the treatment and, the way to sort of manage these conditions. And we're also looking at developing them for GPs. We've got another big project happening where we're working on developing some education, finding out, what GPs need and developing education on inflammatory bowel disease for GPs.
That's fantastic. That's great because, the sufferers themselves, they're going to their GP and they're going, to a dietitian maybe to find out and if the person's not familiar or not that experienced with people, as you said, it might not be very helpful for them. But I know even a gastroenterologist that, or quite a few that I have seen personally, couldn't really comment on diet.
No. Well, it's not their area of expertise, It's a little bit like mental health. We did a survey recently of gastroenterologists, and we were asking them about mental health of their patients. And these were gastroenterologists who looked after people with inflammatory bowel disease. And a lot of them were saying, we were asking them things like, do you actually talk about mental health with your patients? And they were saying, no, well, we don't, because we don't feel really confident about that. It's not our area of expertise. We might ask the, IBD nurse or whatever to do that, or, refer them to a psychologist. So, there's a whole lot of things that, gastroenterologists who specialise in inflammatory bowel disease, they know about the disease, they know about the treatment. And, what sort of options there might be for those things. But, we need to make sure that people with IBD are surrounded by a group of health professionals who work as a team. And, that means you have got a dietitian in your support group and a psychologist and a surgeon you might need at different times,
Yeah.
And a good GP. So it's really important to sort of advocate so that we can get people having really good team-based care.
That sounds like a great integrated approach, not just the supporting the sufferers, but the whole industry education into the old industry and the people that are actually helping sufferers on the front line. That's awesome, really good. So can we talk a little bit about what Crohn's and Colitis Australia aims to do and how they go about it?
Yeah, well, what we're committed to doing is we really want to empower people who are living with IBD to live life to their full potential and to live life fearlessly. It's as we search for a cause or a cure for this disease.
Yep. So
that's what we're committed to do, and everything we do is connected back to that. So in the search for a cause or a cure, we see ourselves as building capacity within the medical research area. And, we try and fund scholarships for people to do their PhD in this area so we can help support new knowledge. We try and fund postdoctoral scholarships, so people who are researchers. This year we're doing a really exciting project. It's called IBD Research Priorities, and we've decided we really want to know what are the research priorities that researchers should be focusing on. So we're doing a big project to endeavour to determine what they are, and then we will be letting the federal government know and the big research funding bodies know what we would like to see, so that we might get some funding allocated for, the scientists and the clinicians who do research to really focus on some areas, so we can get more knowledge and more treatments, as well as, what understand better what's going on here. So that's sort of, one area that we will work on. The other side of it is we really try to advocate for improved quality of care for people with IBD. A number of years ago, we did an audit of 71 hospitals around Australia, and we used these standards that were developed for IBD care, and we found that less than 1% of hospitals actually met all those standards. So in the whole of Australia, only 1%, it was just under 1%. Not many hospitals.
What are some of the things in this standard?
Well, the standards are about, putting in place things like team-based care that we talked about before.
Okay.
Having dietitians on the team, having patients being able to get consultations in holistic care, and a whole host of other things that are important to help people be well managed and support their own management of this disease.
Yeah.
And so what we've done since then is we've done a number of studies ourselves. A couple of years ago, we looked at what the experience of IBD was, and there's a big report that we did about people's experience in living with IBD. And we used that information to try and generate change within the health system. This year, we've also been funded to do a project where we're going to develop some new resources for people living with IBD, and we're hoping to get the right information to individuals at different stages. So, you were saying before that you were diagnosed with Crohn's when you were 12. What you needed to know at that stage would be very different from what you need to know now down the track, when you're a bit older and now you've got a family. Before you did that, you might have had issues about fertility that you needed to think about, and not that you have to worry about that.
I've got 4 kids, so that wasn't an issue for me.
So, there's a whole lot of issues that can arise.
Yeah, but it affects so many things. And
information that people need, at different stages of living with it. So this project is really exciting because we hope to develop sort of these personas and develop information around that. So, they're the sorts of things that we mainly do. The other things we do is we're out there running different programs. So particularly for kids, we started a couple of years ago with a program for young people, so teenagers sort of 13 to 18, called YEP, which is the Youth Empowerment Program. And that's where we get a group of kids to come together and we spend a day with them with different things and activities happening. And, quite often, because I don't know if you found this, Ben, but, you often don't know other people who have this disease as well. And I think you said you were the only one in your family who has it. So meeting people who have it and, connecting with others, there can be lots of benefits in that.
Absolutely.
In sharing stories and, things that may have worked for and helped. If you think about teenagers, being at school, trying to keep up with your work and maybe working part-time and, all those sorts of issues that you face at that age, they're the sorts of things that we talk about. So that's just a bit of an overview of the things that we do at Crohn's and Colitis Australia.
Great example. And I use online support groups to connect with others, but there's something about that local the local meetup that you're supporting, and then obviously there'd be some education into that as well that you guys give people. So it's not just people, sufferers getting together, but it's there's also connecting with you guys and getting information and resources to help. So that sounds like fantastic. Now, so where are those going to be happening?
These are the support groups, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 23 support groups now, and they're growing every year all around Australia. And it's been really interesting because usually the support groups are led by a facilitator, and you come together regularly. It might be once a month or whatever, to meet and to meet others who are living with these issues as well, and to talk about things. But during the pandemic, that wasn't able to happen. So what we had to do was set up some virtual support groups and, help the groups transition into that. And what we've found most recently is some support groups are going to continue to operate that way.
Okay.
So they really like that ability to not have to get to a venue to meet face to face, and it's going to work for them to continue to meet on Zoom or another platform. Whereas some of the other groups are really hanging to get back, and some of them can start doing that fairly soon because, as you say, up in Queensland, you can meet in small numbers, and so all of that will go back. It just depends on what preference people have. So we're now going to have to look at making sure we support the virtual medium as well as the face-to-face, which will be good.
Yeah. There'd be so many organisations that have had to do that learning as well in this, this new world we live in.
That's right.
And people are getting used to that. Maybe before COVID, it was like a bit awkward on a Zoom call. People don't know what to do. But this has kind of forced all of us to kind of get used to it, interacting with people on a screen. It's just the way of the world right now. So that's kind of a bit of a push for all of us into that territory, which I think will, hopefully be really beneficial.
Yeah.
So that's great that you guys are embracing that.
Yeah, well, we'd like to look at it with all of our programs. I mentioned before we run a lot of kids programs. We also do, a kids camp as well. So we're a bit challenged on how we might be able to make that a virtual experience. But we're going to try somehow. We'll be working on, seeing how we might be able to do that as well.
Yeah.
So that we can offer both. And, it sort of breaks down the geography barriers if you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly for those who are living in regional and remote communities who, can't get into cities or, to attend these sorts of things. We can still support people.
Yeah.
And that's why our helpline is really important too. And the other thing that we launched about 12 months ago is the nurse line.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know too much about that, Ben, but it's a really, really good line for people to call and make an appointment to have a chat with a nurse.
Okay. Are these members, or you need to be a member to do this?
No, this is a free.
Okay.
This is for anybody.
Wow.
Anyone with inflammatory bowel disease or a carer.
Okay.
We recently had a dad ring us. His daughter was in intensive care. She was really sick, having a very bad time. And he was sort of, just wanting to talk with a nurse or somebody who would know to find out whether things were right, if people were doing the right thing, because he was so worried about his daughter. And so he booked a time with the the nurse to do that. And we're really fortunate. We have a nurse practitioner in inflammatory bowel disease. So she's just wonderful and has a great network all around the country and can really help people to sort out some issues that are worrying them, or, develop their plan of care, and, connect people with who they need to talk to. And so it's a great service for anyone out there. At any time you can ring and just make an appointment to do that. Our helpline is always there as well, and you don't need to have an appointment for the helpline.
Okay.
So that's available too, and that's just about general things. What am I going to do? I want to travel, or how am I going to sort out my medications and all that sort of thing, and do that. Might be, I know Anita, who's on our helpline, gets all sorts of questions from people, and we just do our best to help where we can. And she's got she has a family member with IBD, and she's got a whole lot of knowledge about all sorts of things. So they're the sorts of things that we encourage people, and just come forward and reach out for support, even if you think if there's any little trouble that you're worried about.
Now, you guys have been operating for 35 years.
Yes.
That's right. And you must have learnt a lot about Crohn's and colitis sufferers in that time. Of course, Leanne, you've been the CEO for the last couple of years.
Yes.
What I'm really interested to know is I want to just ask you about how you got your personal journey into that. I know you've been operating on the executive level in your career for a while. So how did you get involved? And then I want to know, what does the organisation learn? What are the real significant things that they've learnt throughout that journey? So,
Okay. I haven't been there for 35 years, but we did this year celebrate providing 35 years of support in IBD. So it's a really big milestone for us. And unfortunately, we were not able to do all the things that we wanted to do. We wanted to have some gatherings and to recognise people who contributed over the years, and particularly our founder. Her name is Angela McAvoy. And Angela started the organisation 35 years ago in her home, in her house, when she was living in Melbourne at that time. Originally she was from Sydney. And she kicked it off, and she has Crohn's disease. So most people who are connected with the organisation have some connection with inflammatory bowel disease. So for me, I don't have it myself, but I have friends and family who do. And, all of our board members usually have some sort of connection too. Our chairman, his name is Bruce Rosengarten, he has lived with ulcerative colitis for 40 years. And he only recently, when he came on board, came out of the closet and talked about his story. For most of his executive career, which he travelled the world as an executive, he hadn't told anyone about his condition. Only his wife knew. Even his kids didn't know. So he's now recently come out of the closet, and so everyone has their a connection somehow. But over the years, I think we've seen a lot of changes in how this disease is managed. I know when I was meeting with Angela, she talked about she's had so much surgery. In those days, if something wasn't healing, they just cut it out everywhere. And so a lot of people of her age group, there were not the medicines available and treatments that are available now. They didn't exist then. So, at the moment, she doesn't have very much bowel left at all. So, but she's doing okay, but has to really, at times she's been on a enteral nutrition diet, liquid diet, and not able to eat because of her condition. But now, over time, there have been so many more treatments that have been developed, which have really helped to put people into remission. Mm-hmm. How long people stay in remission, we never know. That's different for everybody. Some treatments don't work, but there are a number of new treatments now that have improved the quality of life for people. And also, I think, the medical community are sort of know a lot more about the disease, and there's a lot more research going on.
Of course, yeah. Do you have, are there any personal stories or stories that you can think of sufferers that you have, that the organisation has been involved with, that have really inspired you in your involvement with this organisation over the last few years? Are there any that come to mind that spur you on?
Yeah, I think, seeing people like yourself living a full life is what we want to see. We have one of our ambassadors, Jacinta Parsons. She works in the same industry you do, Ben. She works for the ABC in Melbourne, so she does radio. And, she recently at an event that we had talked about her story. And, she's had to live with a colostomy bag. And, but she's had children and living her life, and, she's found her way through it. So, all of those stories are really inspiring. And, if you follow us on our social media, we have a lot of really brave people who come forward sharing their story. Another one of our ambassadors, Brittany Nichols, she's a surfer and a professional surfer, and she has a colostomy bag as well. And she's probably at the moment, she's just had to have more surgery. But she's just amazing. Like, she gets out in the bikini and, she's a surfer. But she has had a hell of a lot of things to deal with through her life. So all of those stories are just really inspiring. Yeah. It's amazing what people can do, and how willing they are to share it. So we all feel inspired by that. Our whole team is, as I said, we're only a small team, but, we do get a lot of inspiration from the stories that we hear about and the people that we talk to.
Isn't it amazing? You've talked about a number of people that, one of your board member who, had the UC for, 40 years or whatever, and nobody knew except his wife. But people coming out now that, hey, I'm a surfer and I've got a colostomy bag. I mean, nobody really it's not very sexy to talk about having a bowel disease. It's not even sexy to say bowel. It's just that one of those, and certainly not sexy to talk about how it stuffs you up, right? How it affects you. The 20 to 50 bowel movements a day, the always looking out for where the toilet is. Getting, parts of your digestive tract removed, even down to the anus. How do you talk about that with friends and family and on social media? You have to be brave, and it's great to hear that people are brave and they're using their platform, whatever it may be, media, surfing, to talk about this stuff. Like, I can't remember any time that I've seen on mainstream media about somebody living with a colostomy bag, But it's just, I'd like to see more of that, and it's great that some of these people are stepping out and going, you know what, this is me. Let's talk about it. We've all got a bum. We've all got, You know,
Exactly.
this is our bodies, and let's not be
Yep.
ashamed about it. And I think with the talking about it, we will get that more awareness, and with awareness comes the support, the help, the understanding, and that's what you guys are working towards to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that awareness is something we really focus on every May because we have Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Month in May. And this year we had to do it in a virtual way. So we did we always do a social campaign, but we did a campaign about, the theme of the campaign was You're Not Alone. And we wanted to make sure that everyone knew they're not alone out there. And so we focused on the supports that people can call upon, apart from your clinical team, your medical team and all of that sort of thing, reaching out to family and to friends and to work colleagues, can often help, and people want to help if they understand usually. So we really focused on that, and then we also talked about the role of the IBD nurse, because we would like to see many more IBD nurses around the country, because they are really the linchpin to that IBD clinical team. And many of them have helplines that they run all the time. So, if you can't get hold of your specialist, or you've got your appointment, is coming up in a few weeks, and you're just worried about something before you get there, it's usually the IBD nurse that you can call when they've got a really good model happening. So we'd like to see a lot more, and we'd like to support their education as well. So we focused on them this year, and we asked people, who they'd like to thank, who'd sort of helped them. And it was really cool to see all the comments coming back about, either thanking their nurse or their parents or their, it might have even been their boss or whatever, for helping them out. And, it was sort of our way of trying to say, look, do talk about it. People do want to help, usually, if they understand, what's going on. So that awareness is so important.
And so, just lastly, Leanne, I want to ask, I just want to inquire about, you said, the research talking about exercise as being a factor to help with IBD and probably all sorts of chronic disease. I actually found links to studies and things on your website, and great resource to the studies and things that are going on, particularly in exercise, but other fields. What are we also seeing in the research that's coming out that is really supporting people with this disease and helping them to either, whether it be prevention, but more management, and even helping people to get into remission, other than, I guess, the medical drugs that are prescribed?
Yeah, there's a couple of areas, and a big area is diet. I know I've just looked at our magazine for this year, and we've got a couple of really good articles in there for our members around the exclusion diet. So that's a new treatment that's in early days, and there's some really good research and evidence being built around that. So that's something that's interesting. The other thing that's interesting too is the transplant area.
Okay, fecal matter. Yep.
Transplant. There is some evidence building around that, and they're looking at the regulation of that to make sure that that things are done well, and that we're doing those sorts of procedures in a safe way, and targeting the right people who might benefit. And there are some early signs that people living with ulcerative colitis may benefit from these new treatments.
In particular?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
over Crohn's, you mean, or?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, at the moment. So, but, as more research is done on the microbiome, that's a big, the microbiome is,
Your gut bugs, everyone.
they're talking about that as being a new organ. And,
Yes.
That's really big.
It's
That's,
huge.
you think of the organs that we have in our body, the liver, the kidney, the skin is an organ. The skin is the biggest organ at the moment, but the gut microbiome might beat that. If it becomes an organ, it's got a huge surface area because it's all these things that are living in our gut, in our normal flora, and helping us to function. And there's a really big study going on in Australia at the University of Sydney where we have a scholarship. Dr. Betty Wu, who's a gastroenterologist, is doing her PhD in the study, and they're just starting to recruit at the moment, and they're recruiting from all around Australia, and they're looking at people with healthy biomes and people with biomes that are not as healthy, and they're going to be trying to see what they can learn from that. So, that's a huge area as well, and I think those sorts of areas are exciting because it's the drug there's always new drugs coming out too. That's always happening, but these other areas will offer more opportunities for people in the future, to choose from. So yeah, I think it's it's exciting times in healthcare and treatments and.
Yep. Anything of the psychological or mental therapy and how that mindfulness, things like that, and how that impacts on IBD?
Yeah. One of the studies, we know that a number of psychological therapies can be useful for people, and particularly, cognitive behavioural therapy is a common therapy that psychologists can use to help. But we're doing a study at the moment where we're looking at, it's called a writing intervention. So we're having people write, and we're going to see if that makes a difference in how people feel and manage their condition. So there's a whole lot of, different things that I think we can learn. Through the Live Fearless Challenge, we're going to be doing some wellbeing types of videos as well. So, as well as doing the exercise, it's about, how does yoga help and how does mindfulness and, those sorts of techniques. I mean, all of them I think are useful for all of our well-being, but can be particularly useful for people with IBD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think it's probably, if there was one thing that I've heard sufferers agree on, is that stress is one of the biggest triggers for, a flare-up when they know they're stressed, anxious about something. They tend to feel it in the gut.
Yeah.
And there's
stress
even
or a decreased mood,
Yes.
feeling flat or whatever. I've heard gastroenterologists say that they can, when they talk with people, if they can pick those things up, they suspect that things are not going good and they might have a flare. They can actually sort of start to think, well, this might happen, and they've seen it happen. So, we do know that there is a strong connection there between how we think about things and what our mood is like. Remember I talked before about that study we did about my IBD experience?
Yes.
When we did that study, we found that 52% of people who did it, and we had over 1,000 people respond to our survey, 52% of them were actually in psychological distress at the time of doing the survey.
Wow.
So, that really was a strong indicator for us to say, people need help in dealing with that psychological distress. It's really important that they have, supports in that area.
Absolutely.
Whether it's through a psychologist or, that the mental health is supported. It's critical.
Leanne, thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for today, but it's been really inspiring for me. I know somebody living with IBD to hear of what Crohn's and Colitis Australia is doing. You see these organisations pop up here, there, and there, and it's just great to hear from you all the work that's going into it, not just for the front line, the sufferers themselves, and those around them, but also how you guys are educating the medical field as well, and innovating to try and bring that awareness, which brings understanding, which brings greater support. So thank you.
My pleasure, Ben. It's been lovely talking with you. And, as I said, your story is inspiring in itself, and it's the everyday experience that we try to use to raise that awareness. It's so important that we're real about this. These are real problems that we don't know enough about. So our view is that, we need everyone in there adding value. We need people living with this disease involved, and we need the medical community and the clinical teams involved. And if we all come together, we can work on this, and people will be managed much better, and we can ultimately get a cure. Is the big goal, you know?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Leanne, again. All the best. We'll catch up soon.
Yep. Best wishes and take care.
Thank you. You too.